When you watch Bleach for the first time, especially from the beginning up to the end of the Arankar arc, you might start to feel that Hollows as a race are the most mistreated in the story. They seem to be constantly subjected to violence and discrimination simply because they are Hollows, because of their appearance and their nature. And of course, this conflict between Shinigami and Hollows may not be what it appears on the surface. After all, when a Shinigami stops a Hollow with a Zanpakuto, they are not actually killing it, they are purifying it, and that Hollow either gets sent to the Soul Society, or if it was truly evil, it goes to hell. And this fundamental concept is the foundation for all ideological conflicts. Call them what you will, between Hollows and Shinigami. It's a struggle that will never truly end. Hollows are a necessary part of maintaining the balance. If they weren't, they wouldn't have their own realm where they can exist without interference. And in fact, even plans made by some Shinigami to eradicate Hollows from the root have failed or been opposed. And I'm talking here, guys, about the 8th Kenpachi. As a Shirosoya, around 250 years ago, he launched an ambitious plan to send an army of criminals to wipe out the Hollows from Wikomondo. And 250 years later, he wanted to go even further, targeting humans, the very source of Hollows, by performing psychological surgeries on billions of people to erase all emotions that might lead them to become Hollows. But all these dreams and plans were opposed, both intellectually and with force, because, as I said, Shinigami purify Hollows, and they leave the ones living in Wikomondo alone, because they understand that Hollows are essential to maintaining balance. Even in the original world, Hollows were part of the Rishi cycle. But on the other hand, guys, there is a race that was born out of suffering, a race born cursed. Yes, we're talking here, guys, about the Quincies. How did this happen? Why did it happen? That's exactly, guys, what we're going to explore in this video. And let's start with the name itself, Quincy. Kubo defined this name to mean the destroyers, and their name alone carries destruction, and that's directly tied to the true nature of their power. A power that brings destruction to the world, or rather, to all worlds. And if we go back, guys, to the origin of this destruction power, we find the first person to use it was Ryo, the man who appeared in the original world to stop Hollows from devouring humans. In the novel, guys, he was described as a Quincy, a Shinigami, and also a human with countless powers like Fullbring. And that's why Tokinada said that this man can be considered the ancestor of all three races. And more accurately, guys, he is the true father of the Quincies, because without him, Yhwach wouldn't have existed, and the concept of the Quincies wouldn't have existed at all. And according to Tokinada, Ryo was seen as a symbol of hope. He stood between Hollows and humans at a time when the world was in chaos. But even though his intentions were noble, his power was not. It brought destruction. And the novel describes he used the power of destruction to wipe out Hollows. And that only made things worse and gave the ancestors of the Shinigami an excuse to split the original world into the three known realms. Ryo also had a son, Yhwach. We don't know for sure if Yhwach inherited Ryo's will and believed that the world needed to be restored to its original state, or if he came to that belief on his own. But let's not forget, guys, that Bernida, Ryo's left hand, was also a Quincy and also believed that the world must return to its original form. However, guys, whether or not Yhwach was influenced by Ryo, what's clear is that his existence was not welcomed in the new divided realms. Why? Because when the original world was split, there was no consideration for the emergence of a new race called Quincies. The three worlds we know are the world of the dead, Soul Society, a world for Hollows, Wikomondo, and a word for humans. Now when we talk about humans, we mean both normal humans and those with abilities, like Fullbrings. And this kind of human, guys, can move between all three worlds, and that's why they can be part of the cycle too. And I can give you a simple example. A human dies, becomes a soul, and either goes to the Soul Society to live as a normal spirit, or they might become a Hollow and ended up in Wikomondo, evolving based on their environment. And Fullbrings can do that too. They're humans with special powers, like Ginjo, Tsukishima, and Giriko. When they died, they all passed on to the Soul Society. But when we talk about the Quincies, we're talking about a race that could be seen as a parasitic. And the reason, as I said, because the Quincies didn't exist in the original world. Only humans did. Humans who lived in a world that combined life and death, alongside Hollows. And so these two races were then redistributed into new realms. But the Quincy race, it emerged later in the human world through Yuab, who is their ancestor. More importantly, guys, and this is the key, he inherited the most destructive trait from Ryu. The power of destruction, the power to erase Hollows from existence. However, guys, the Quincies seem to discover a bitter truth when they first emerged. One, that their power to erase Hollows from existence was in fact the only weapon they had to protect themselves from the Hollows themselves. Just as Quincies have the ability to completely erase the Hollows, Hollows also possess the ability to poison Quincies. Any hollow contamination is fatal to a Quincy because they have no immunity to hollows and can't even undergo hollowification like Shinigami can. And this is why, guys, as Mayuri stated and Urahara confirmed, the Quincy's hatred toward hollows doesn't stem from ideological conflict or anything like that, but from fear. A deep fear of the threat hollows pose to them. Any injury from a hollow, no matter how small, could mean death. And thus the Quincy's powers were developed to be lethal to hollows. But the Quincy's were unfortunate and the hollows were lucky, because the Shinigami, the third party in the survivor conflict between Quincy's and hollows, ultimately sided with the hollows, simply because hollows are part of the natural order of the world, while Quincies are considered intruders. The reason hollows from existence would disrupt the balance of the realms, so the Shinigami saw the best solution as exterminating the Quincies, and thereby preserving the world's balance. And this meant, guys, that the Quincies suffered on both ends, being attacked by hollows without any way to build immunity, and when they tried to defend themselves, they were met with opposition from the Shinigami, who didn't want them to destroy hollows, and this led to direct wars with the Shinigami. And according to Urahara Kiski, the Quincies faced the threat of extinction twice, once 1,000 years ago and again 200 years ago. So imagine a Quincy clan being hunted by monsters on one side and persecuted by spiritual beings on the other, just because they were trying to defend themselves. Eventually, guys, even the Quincies themselves split into two factions. Yuhaba's faction and Soken Ichida's faction. Yuhaba's side, led by the man himself, believed that the root of all that hatred and that suffering was from Ryu. Yes, Yuhaba is the father of the Quincy's race, but he came from Ryu. And so, Yuhaba saw Ryu's acceptance of dividing the original world into new realms as a betrayal of his son, and by extension of the entire Quincy race that descended from that son. And as Yuhaba said, guys, in episode 2 of part 3, even though Ryu had the power to foresee the future for over 1,000 years, he did nothing to prevent the Quincy's crushing defeat at the hands of the Shinigami 1,000 years ago, nor their near total extermination 200 years ago. That's why Yuhaba adopted the idea that the source of all this pain must be removed. His own father, Ryu Adonaios, the man who, in Yuhaba's eyes, accepted humiliation and became a puppet of the Shinigamis. And by removing him, Yuhaba believed he could create a world where Quincies could finally belong, not as a curse but as a rightful race, a world where fear no longer exists. Now, guys, you could say that Yuhaba's reaction is understandable, considering how much the Quincies suffered, persecuted by Shinigami, endangered by hollows, and abandoned by Ryu. But at the same time, his policies posed a direct threat to the Quincies themselves. And that's where the second Quincy faction comes in, led by none other than Soken Ishida. He stood firmly against Yubab's ideology and perhaps became the strongest voice of opposition. In fact, guys, the final episodes of Part 3 clearly highlighted Soken Ishida's beliefs. It wasn't that he didn't understand Yubaba. He understood him perfectly. He knew that Yubaba wanted to be the savior of the Quincies, to liberate them from a world that despises them. But at the same time, Yubaba's actions were cruel toward his own people, setting their lives to grow stronger and fulfill his goal. That's why I believe the Quincies who lived in the human world and opposed Yubaba were the ones who suffered the most. They were surrounded by danger on all sides. First of all, they had no immunity to Hollows, so they had to fight to survive, but their very power to fight back would disrupt the balance of the world. And that made them targets of the Shinigami's enforcement, hunted just for defending themselves. And worst of all, their emperor Yubaba controlled their lives through Auswählen, a technique that took countless lives and tore families apart. Which brings us to Uryu Ishida. And I can say that Ishida Uryu, the only Quincy who managed to escape all these curses. He was immune to Hollow's poisoning, even though he was attacked by Xyloaporo and his arm torn off by Ilkura. He showed no symptoms of Hollow poisoning. And Kobo confirmed that Uryu is a special case, and there is something in him that makes him immune to Hollows. Not only that, he also immune to Auswählen, Yubaba's terrifying ability. So it makes you wonder, guys, could Uryu Ishida be the mutation, the exception that will break the curses surrounding the Quincy race? Would he be the one to finally end the Quincy suffering? Tell me guys your opinions about the whole subject, what I have said, my last question, and see you guys in my next video.